a large number of presenters and staff will no longer be required.
It's quite a sad situation around the country.
The word local is being taken out of local radio.
That person you listen to is your best friend.
DJs and the radio industry have united in their shock and disbelief.
It is the media cockroach. Everyone said it's going to die and it just keeps going.
Well, over the last decade, studios across the region have closed.
That niche that local radio held has probably gone.
The headlines: Lancashire's oldest commercial radio station is to close its studios in Preston.
There are people who probably have no idea what local radio really is now.
Local radio means it's the station from where I live.
I think that makes it really special because we focus on what's going on around us.
You won't make great radio unless you break the rules.
The boss will never tell you you're good.
The bosses know nothing about radio.
Playing the same records over and over. Just about everybody does that here.
If you cannot punctuate great music with great local content, you may as well just plug in an iPod.
Of course it matters. It's about bringing the community together.
Community radio will be it if it's given a chance.
We have come totally full circle.
It's just a unique one-to-one relationship.
We were the loudspeaker of the village.
Hello and welcome to an hour that I hope is going to intrigue and entertain. If you're listening to this radio station, then there's a chance you like listening to the radio, and you've probably heard a jingle just like this many times before.
BBC Radio Solent.
But now, if we rewind the clock about 5 decades, this was the sound of BBC Radio Solent when it launched.
Hello, I'm Jean Darnell.
And I'm Walter Fancott.
We'll both be here every Friday evening in a program called A Problem Shared.
So if you have a problem or personal worry, why not write to us in confidence at BBC Radio Solent, and we'll be glad to talk about and, as the title suggests, share your problem.
So let's make it a date, shall we? Every Friday evening at 20 to 8. A Problem Shared.
I'm Richard Latto, and as part of my role at the BBC, I often look through the archives to find rare little nuggets, gems, that inspire me really to pitch and develop specific shows dedicated to a whole load of topics as broad as the Titanic and Tony Hancock to Doctor Who and the Beatles. And during my various projects, I've stumbled across many pieces featuring local radio. And it's always been a plan, really, if I'm honest, at the back of my mind to find an excuse to dust them down and showcase them. Then, with the massive changes in 2019 in the local radio commercial sector and the ever-present rumours of more changes to come for many stations, I thought the time was right to do something with them. This is really a companion piece to the television documentary, which is available now on the BBC iPlayer, also called The Village Loudspeaker. And like that show, this isn't a definitive history of local radio, it's more of a flavour of how things have changed over the years and a glimpse of what the future may hold. In this radio version, I'm going to play extended cuts of a lot of the archive I found and the fresh interviews I've gathered. Let's start with what is perhaps my favourite find of them all. In March of 1973, the BBC broadcast a cracking interview. It's between some of the biggest names in radio at the time, I think it's fair to say. Something that's also become, when you listen to it now and watch it back, quite a valuable time capsule. Hosting the Old Grey Whistle test was Bob Harris. He welcomed fellow broadcasters Kid Jensen and Johnny Walker into his studio. Why? Well, to showcase the mood of the industry just before local commercial radio started in the UK. Now, 5 decades later, I've paid them another visit to see if their predictions were right.
Well, last week the BBC announced the summer schedules on radios 1 and 2, one of several steps in preparation for the arrival of local commercial radio to this country within the next few months.
I thought it was amazing how we were fairly accurate in terms of our predictions as to what might happen.
Kid Jensen has flown over from the Grand Duchy, and Johnny Walker has driven all the way from Ealing to discuss this and some of the general implications of the new awareness in this country to radio and what it can do.
I recall predicting in the interview that I did with Bob Harris and Johnny Walker what I thought the future of radio would be, and I talked about the narrowcasting of broadcasting, that we would become more niche.
A lot of people put down like pigeonholing of music, and you shouldn't say this is that, but I think it's right for a person who's in a particular frame of mind, because I program my show on Luxembourg to a mood.
One day we could even have 6 stations in London.
Do you think we could arrive at a situation though where we get maybe a choice of half a dozen stations in London? Do you think that's a possibility?
You mean like one station programming
station.
R&B and one station catering for jazz?
Yeah,
I guess I got a little bit of that right.
In America, sometimes it can be that way in cities where you have like 80 radio stations, both on the AM and FM dial to choose from. You're spoiled. You don't know where to go. You know.
Johnny was doing a daytime playlisted show on Radio 1, and Kid and I suppose we would call ourselves the progressive music people, with the freedom to play the tracks that we liked.
Do you find your freedom of choice limited, John, with the music that you...
Well, I don't choose any of the records on my programme. They're all decided by a panel of executive producers.
Well, we had a producer, which a lot of people who were ex-pirates found difficult, and I found it difficult, because we'd never had producers. We didn't know kind of what they were for. We'd been able to do radio without a producer. So why do you need a producer? The music was governed by a playlist, and the producers would meet once a week. And then I was allowed to suggest a record for my producer to take to the meeting. No DJs went to the meeting.
I used to get frustrated because I came coming up through music. That was always the thing I wanted to do, and I could still do it. I could be involved in. I wanted to be on a playlist panel or something like that. But I think people were mistrustful of that. They say, "What does he want to be in those meetings for?"
It used to take like a week, 10 days for a record to get on the playlist, and I was about getting things on straight away.
How much are you going to let the DJs loose, every single one of them, with their own individual ideas of the music they want to play? Clearly, it's going to be difficult for the station to establish a kind of musical identity unless you're prepared to say, that is our music identity, that it doesn't have an identity, it's going to be everything. So I think the idea of imposing some kind of playlist or some kind of sound, to target some kind of audience that you feel might be receptive to what it is you're doing, is not a bad idea.
So who's qualified to choose the music for a radio
Nobody,
station?
the people.
The people who listen?
Yeah,
of course.
And that's the danger. The executive producers stuck in London who don't travel around and meet the people, and the advertisers deciding what the people want to hear, they make mistakes.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to raise, because it seems to me that on a, if you like, a kind of ground floor level, it's we three that have much more contact in that sense with the people who do actually listen to the station.
The problem with commercial radio is that they are always going to be beholden to the advertisers for sponsoring or advertising on the station, and there's ways and means and the politics of the way things go of the station playing music it doesn't necessarily believe in, but will play it anyway because somebody out there is going to like it. And sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong.
I personally am looking forward to the advent of commercial radio because you tend to get very stagnant. It's all right saying much more music and all that, but what else is there? There's a record player and
because I believe very, very strongly that really radio is the most personal medium there is.
I think it's the
that
most
you
effective.
literally can talk into the ear of one person who's listening to you.
What is, I would rather listen to, I think the classic tale, and it's been said before, is listening to a horror story on radio or watching it on television. And if you're listening to it on radio, you've got your ear, and because the radio conjures pictures in your mind, the imagination, and you can take people far away from where they are in reality, whereby they're restricted on 21 inches rather on a TV screen, and there it is for them. But if you can make them think, not educate in terms of other things, but if you can make them think and stretch their imaginations and carry them away, I think that's good.
Fascinating stuff, and of course Bob, Kid and Johnny all went on to work at various local commercial radio stations over the years. Now Bob in particular has many fond memories of his time at Radio 210 in Reading.
Radio 210 was started by this eccentric talent spotter called Neil French Blake, who discovered Mike Reid, Steve Wright. In fact, they used to do the Reid and Wright show together.
This is Radio 210 Thames Valley, 210 metres medium wave, that's 1430 kilohertz, and 97 FM in stereo.
210. Every Saturday and Sunday from 10 until 2, it's Reid and Wright, just for you.
And a lot of other amazing talent as well. There was a guy called Dave Glass, who was a kind of Kenny Everett-style genius, actually, who went on to work at the centre of sort of national hospital radio. And in fact, we still hear another one of the voices, Gavin McCoy, on Steve Wright's show, because Gavin is the one who says, Steve Wright in the afternoon, now playing everywhere. That's Gavin McCoy. It all started at Radio 210. I mean, Neil had this amazing ear for talent. And I went down there to do a couple of programs, and really, you know, Neil was saying to me, I want you to do anything you want to do, you know, I just go on air and be yourself. And that, it was, you know, it was great. And I remember him saying to Steve Wright, it was so funny, but I mean, this is what it was like in those days. You know, Steve was doing Drive Time on Radio 210, and Steve and I were sitting next to each other in one of the desks. Neil, it was the building was a converted ambulance station, and Neil was up on the bridge looking down over the newsroom and all the people, the staff. And he called Steve up, I want to see you. So Steve went up there, and Neil was always smoking a cigarette. And he said, I'm going to put you on the news desk. And Steve's going, I don't want to go on the news desk. You know, I'm putting you on the news desk. So Steve said, when is this going to start? And Neil said, now. And Steve said, wait, I've got a show to do. I'm doing Drive Time in 2 hours' time. He said, I've got somebody else to do it. But kicking and screaming, he put Steve Wright on the news desk for 3 months. And Steve said it's one of the best things that ever happened to him, because he learned so much. And that was the thing. You were cutting your own tape. The BBC had a big machine round it in those days. You know, you had these, you know, all the guys in their brown coats standing at the reel-to-reel machines. There was an army of them. With the commercial radio stations, you were on the coalface. You were doing it all yourself. So that, you learned so much, and I learned a lot from commercial radio at that time.
Broadcaster Bob Harris. And looking through the archive, I found a superb piece from 1979 when BBC South Today visited Radio 210 during one of their outside broadcasts.
And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to all the latecomers who've arrived at this social club here. We're at...
This afternoon, DJ Paul Hollingdale is doing his stuff meeting the people in the Gasboard Sports and Social Club.
I'd like to say hello now to
Thames Valley Radio, the local commercial station, got off the ground with difficulty.
He said, Paul, you know, there are a lot of people that can't be here today.
But now it's safely on the air and with a buoyant balance sheet.
We came on the air at a time when there was no money around at all, so we had difficulty raising the money to begin with. But once that was out of the way and we actually went on air, the response was fantastic from what you would call the working classes, the taxi drivers and the people who work in the factories. It took a much longer time for what I advertised was called ABC1s to get used to the radio station. And the reason is that they were used by then to a dart of pop music from the BBC stations, Radio 1 and Radio 2, but there was nothing else in those stations. And so they associated popular music with drivel, effectively. And it took us a long time to convince people in that upper class area that we were doing something else apart from playing just popular music.
How did you know that it was making a hit?
Well, we've always been profitable, I'm glad to say, right from month one. We've made a profit for our shareholders, and we are independent, and we do cost the public nothing.
You're listening to the Village Loudspeaker, a flavour of how local radio has evolved over the years.
I pity the poor so-and-so who has to take over from Kenny Everett. Can you imagine? A month later, it's me!
Graham Dean, a big name in the local radio landscape. He presented the breakfast show at Capital Radio after Kenny Everett vacated the chair, only just after the station launched.
Graham Dean. Doodly-dum-de-dum. Sparks now. Looks.
I began with them about a year and a half into its life, so I joined them in May 1975. They've been on since October 73. And they had tough times. They got the music policy wrong. They were a little bit too middle of the road, not enough of the pop music. Because apart from Radio 1, there was nothing else in those days. There really was nothing apart from the BBC. And so they were looking, commercial radio needed to step up to the plate and offer something a little bit different and more of it. So they were having a lot of troubles. They had money troubles. Luckily, our chairman was a certain Sir Dicky Poo, as Kenny used to call him, Richard Attenborough. Lovely, lovely man. And he, by having an affiliate, being Dicky and having an affiliation with banks and things like that, he was able to keep us on air keep the station on air. They changed format, made it more top 40. Then I joined just at the right time, and Capital then went from strength to strength. And I was just me. I've always just been me, really, on the air, and I think that's all they wanted. And the other thing was, because, you know, the money's still... there was the 3-day week when Capital first started, strikes everywhere, and so the advertising was very thin on the ground. That's why they were having money problems. And so, you know, as I've said to many people before, and they think I'm joking, but it's absolutely true. There I was, Mr. Cheap, Mr. Cheerful, put him on breakfast. And that's literally how it happened. And I just remember saying to people, you know, I was the rookie, and I was just saying to people, if the figures only go down a little bit, I'll have succeeded. And you know what? They went up. I've never known to this day how.
Oh, love that. Roxy music and looks. It's 7:23, and can you imagine being in a tent somewhere out in the wild, in the dark, in the dead of night, and suddenly as you're asleep you feel something furry brushing up against you? Well, this happened to a soldier in West Germany, you see. So he bit this furry thing, didn't want to take any chances, and he looked outside his tent and he saw a fox limping away.
Capital turned itself around, and suddenly it was cool. Capital was cool. The BBC, Radio 1 used to listen to Capital. And I think that says it all. They began to do it right. They had great personalities. I mean, Michael Aspel followed me. We used to have a 9 o'clock ding-dong fun handover, which, you know, a lot of people said was required listening. Because I was the new boy, so, you know, it was like father and son, or headmaster and pupil. And he was a lovely guy and such a great talent. There was Dave Cash, there was Roger Scott in the afternoon, and Nicky Horn in the evening. All these people I worked with at the Biscuit Factory. And they were getting it right. You get a feel that people are listening to this. I don't think we realised or appreciated, I think I could certainly say that, I don't think I realised just how big it was. Now remember, it was only the BBC and the odd commercial radio station. We were the second to go on air after LBC. And, you know, obviously there were less stations for people to choose, so that might have had something to do with my good figures, but people aren't going to listen if they don't like it, that's for sure. It had a buzz about it. We were local. We were for London.
Broadcaster Graham Dean. So what was it like to be part of a successful local radio station that then had to change and evolve over the years?
If you're a visitor, if you're vacation bound, have a very happy holiday on Plymouth Sound.
I was born in Plymouth. I grew up in the city. It wasn't hard to see why the local commercial radio station there was very popular. At one time, Plymouth Sound was the most successful station in the country, with over 60% of residents in the city listening to some part of the station's output each week. The grip that the station had on the city at its peak, it was phenomenal. The original programme controller and the morning phone-in presenter David Bassett referred to the station as the Village Loudspeaker. Well, I paid a visit to some of the voices who were there when the station really was a local institution.
Nice to see you down here. Glad to have you around. Stick with us here on Plymouth Sound.
We got the licence and we went on air May the 19th, 1975.
And a very, very good morning, Plymouth. Today is the day. It's well and truly come. They tell me we're no longer rehearsing.
I remember that first day because there were dozens of people walking all in and out, and I was just doing the show.
Plymouth Sound launched breakfast presenter Colin Bauer.
They told me when they started this job, they said, you'll be all alone. I've never had so many people in the studio in my whole life.
One of the things I remember is the local BBC. They said, we can't ignore you. It's a very big thing. A new radio station. We're going to broadcast you for about 3 or 4 minutes. Would you do me a favour? Don't play a commercial for about the next 5 or 7 minutes. So I said, right, I'll make a point, no commercial. Because he said, we're going to take you now, and that was it. So at one point I was going over on 2 stations at the same time.
We have looked at the revenue which we need to make our station a viable proposition.
Our chairman, Lord Morley, was a guiding influence to us all.
Plymouth Sound programme controller and presenter Louise Churchill.
What effect is your advertising revenue likely to have, do you think, on local newspapers?
I believe that local radio, once it has carved out a place for itself, will be seen as complementary to the other media.
What people overlooked, I think, at the time was that we weren't looking to get rich. Neither the board, the chairman, Lord Morley, the board, none of us expected to be millionaires.
But the station did quickly become a success thanks to a few magic ingredients.
When I said, well, we're going to do phone-ins and you're going to be able to phone the station and express your view on the government or the council or the local golf club. You will have a vehicle to say whatever you like within legal limits on the air, and you will be heard all over Plymouth and South East Cornwall. Oh, well, don't know I want to do that anyway, you know. It wasn't very, they couldn't grab it. And the only people who understood what a phone-in was were the people in London who had LBC. And they understood. But down here in Devon and Cornwall, I think we weren't so sure.
Plymouth Sound is a household name. The music at 261 is heard all over the city.
Plymouth Sound's audience figures in the city gave it the highest market share of any local station in the country.
We had a marvellous lineup of presenters from the beginning. Carmela Mackenzie, as she was then, was absolutely brilliant. Homeward Bound on Plymouth Sound.
I've got a message for a particular farmer now if he's listening in, because we've had a message that a herd of cows has been seen escaping from a field at Eggbuckland from the fields by Forder Valley Road. So if he's listening in now and if he thinks it might be his herd of cows, could he telephone 774454?
Her style was quiet, pleasant, knowledgeable and friendly. And I think everybody loved Carmela.
And also lost a baby's size 4 jumping jack shoe, and this was lost on the 5th of April on the number 30 bus between Keam and Freedom Fields. So if you handed this in to the conductor or if you picked it up, then please call 709 567 Plymouth, 709 567.
At that time, we had presenters that all came from Plymouth, and it worked because we knew what we were talking about. We knew every road.
Plymouth Sound presenter Ian Culvert.
We knew most people that owned stores and fish and chip shops and pub landlords. He was like Emmerdale in a way, or Dibley even.
Ian Culvert, of course. Well, he was the naughty boy.
I went down to Motley Plain. It was an electrical store. I remember on the corner. I can't remember the name of it now. And she said he won't advertise because he said nobody listens to us. So David said, right, tomorrow everybody, as all presenters, we wished him happy birthday.
One of the top line presenters at Plymouth Sound, and people adored him. The listeners adored him. And I think I'm sure that he was everyone who had ever been a mother, they thought, yes, this is the naughty boy, you know. But a nice naughty boy, not a bad naughty boy, a little saucy boy.
We said, happy birthday to so-and-so at so-and-so. Happy 50th birthday. Next day, he was inundated with calls. Didn't say it was your birthday, didn't say it was your birthday. The sales girl came back, said he can't believe how many people listen to Plymouth Sound. And he advertised from then on. Now that was David's Montreal training from North America, from Canada, that taught him, you know, how to get advertisers and make people listen. Again, we just didn't, it was so clever. That was brilliant. To this day, I'll never forget it.
Was he going to go over the line? Am I going to get a call from the radio authority because he said too much? And he always just pulled back at the time when you were reaching for the red phone to ring up and say, stop him.
I was doing the evening show, and there was an awful gang of people in the city called the Central Element that used to follow Plymouth Argyle and cause all the trouble. And because I always said they ruined Plymouth Argyle, we want to go out there and support a team, they would ring me up, and I used to get threats and things like that. And one night somebody rang live on air and said, be careful when you leave the building tonight. And this is live on air. So I didn't do anything. All I knew is that Brian Measures would come in and I would go out. Simple as that. He would come in and Brian came in 9:30, 9:15. He was on air at 10. He said, Ian, there's loads of cars outside. So I thought, oh, what do I do? Do I ring the police? Do I do it? And I didn't. I thought, no, I'm just going to go out. And when I went out there, all these car doors open. 42 commando, there must have been 100 Marines outside Earl's Acre saying, we heard that, we're just making sure you get home all right. And I thought, that's how radio works. This is incredible. And I was so chuffed, bring it on, boys, you know, even though I would have run a mile.
It was huge in Plymouth, and it was just so community orientated because they would be doing everything from, you know, the lost cats and stolen vehicles.
Plymouth Sound presenter Martin Burgess-Moon.
They used to have a programme on a Wednesday called Wednesday Walk-In, where I think it was Peter Gregg at lunchtime, and he would say to people, if there's anything going on, if you've got anything going on like a car boot sale, a charity event, whatever, just come in. And so every Wednesday at lunchtime, reception would be packed with people that had come in off the street, and they would be led down to the studio, say their piece to Peter about what their local event was, and then they'd go. And that was what it was like, and it would be absolutely packed with people. And you knew that anything and everything you said on air, everybody would know about it. And so any event that had happened, if you talked about it on air, it would be well attended because everybody listened to it.
Vosper sponsored the cars, so my name was splattered all over them. You'd have a few things thrown at them. Smashed windows at a gig one night, but I think I know who did that, and that wasn't radio related. But the funniest one ever of how I got to be a good friend of George Best was Mary Stavin was Miss World, and she made a record. And again, we go out for a meal after, and she told her PR person, she said, you go back to the hotel, I'm going to stay with you and we're going to go for a drink or something. So I said, where are we going? She said, I fancy a Kentucky. She said, they're taking me to all these posh places. She said, have you got a Kentucky? I said, yeah, Motley Plain. I had an orange Ford Capri, name all over it, musical notes, and even the wheel in the middle of the tire was Silver Disc Records. And I went and got a bargain bucket for me and Miss World down the side street of Motley Plain. And somebody threw some old chicken bones at us. I'll never forget that. And she laughed. I bet they don't realise you're sat in the car with. I said, well, I can't please everyone. I said, so maybe they don't like me. That's fair enough. But from that came the point of, she was George Best's girlfriend. And I said, can you do me? Well, she said, I've had a great night when I dropped her back to the hotel. Anything I can do? I said, yeah, I want George to come and play football for cancer, leukemia and children. Leave it with me, she said. Got a call the next day. That's it. We had 9,000 people at Home Park. And strange little things like that. So yeah, I've only had chicken, a smash window chicken. You'll get the odd abuse because there'll be jealous people, rightly so. But to be honest, for all that time I was on, I was really well accepted, as was the rest of the team, not just me, we all were. When we went to open something, loads of people turned up. I had to do something at Southway School. I was chased through the school by girls. And I had my young boxer dog with me then, Heidi. We were running through the school. It went crazy. It was like pop star-ish stuff. And that's because there was a figure there that played their music and they listened on the radio too. Those days are gone.
We didn't have the social media back then, obviously, so people would literally have to put pen to paper if they wanted to get in touch with you. And I did used to get a lot of letters. Some of them were, you know, saucy and interesting, and some of them were sort of fan-based, where people would just literally write in and say, hi, my name's so-and-so, I like this music, I like it when you say things like this, and blah, blah, blah. And you would give them a mention on air. And you just get so many callers, a lot of callers. And there'd be some evenings where I would just not want to take another call. And so, because it would just... that was a part of the reason why you didn't really have to do a lot of prep, because you get so many callers coming in and it would just keep you with the material. And there were some evenings where I would cover up the flashing lights of the phone with a CD, because I didn't want to take any more calls. And then you see the door light flashing and go out to reception and the police are there because people have rung the police to say they couldn't get through to Plymouth Sound to put a dedication on. I always remember that.
It was very much a learning process, and I think probably I was basically terrified from the beginning to the end. And of course the great fear was not getting any phone-in people. People wouldn't call in, and they didn't, and I was talking to myself for 2 hours sometimes with just 1 or 2 calls. And one guest I had on Talk with Louise was a very well-known chef who had, she owned the Horn of Plenty. And I thought, well, she's going to be a fantastic guest. She's well known, she's known internationally, she's a brilliant chef. Everybody knows the Horn of Plenty. It'll go like a bomb. Well, we sat there and it didn't go like a bomb, and we didn't get any calls. Until, in desperation, I said, well, tell me, Sonia, have you ever made what do you put in a pasty? What sort of pasty do you sell in the Horn of Plenty? She said, we don't do very many, but we do. And she said something about putting carrot in it. And the phones went mad. Everybody was phoning in and saying, you do not put that in a pasty. You put this and that, and potato and onions. You never put carrot. Maybe a little sweet. So the whole thing took off. And from that day on, we never had problem getting people calling in.
And here's Betty.
Oh, to answer that Sarah's question, does she live round this area? I don't believe she lives anywhere near this place.
Well, she didn't say she lived there. She said she visited the restaurant.
All I can hear is thump, thump, thump. And I'll tell you now, it's not the noise of the casino we're on about. It's the people leaving there, slamming the doors and revving up the taxis, waiting for them.
I didn't interest myself in the ratings. I just put my head down and did what I could. And I didn't, in the early stages, it wasn't important to me to know how many people were listening, just that anybody was listening and that they were liking what they heard. But it was successful, and David Bassett, of course, was the guiding light behind all that. He knew what he was doing.
This is 261 Plymouth Sound.
And a very good morning, everybody. Welcome to a lovely-looking Friday, April the 15th, and to the time in our Election Open Line series set aside for the division of Penny Cross. It's a two-way fight in Penny Cross.
Manchester United had Sir Alex Ferguson. Plymouth Sound had David Bassett. They don't come any better. Masters at the game.
Good morning all, and welcome to Phone Forum, our verbal free-for-all of the air. We'd like very much to hear your views on anything and everything under the sun. The number to call, 27651.
He lived in Canada for a long while, and of course he was broadcasting in Vancouver, doing the sort of thing that was what he wanted to bring to Plymouth, was everything that he had done in Vancouver. And of course he had terrible fights with the radio authority because he wanted to do things which were permitted in Canada but not in Britain at that stage. It was very heavily regulated. People nowadays would be shocked to know how very heavily radio was regulated in the early days, and it really was difficult. And although we had a very good relationship with the radio authority, or the Independent Broadcasting Authority as it was to begin with, but nevertheless the rules were the rules, and we couldn't get around them either in programming or in advertising, which was really, that was the worry, that we couldn't do what we wanted to do on the adverts, which of course these days is free for all.
If you didn't hear from David, you knew you did well. He wasn't a pat on the back person. He said, use the phone, engage with your listener. You're not one way, make it two way. And I could say anything and get a reaction. What did you think? And we'd all have the Evening Herald, because that too was part. We weren't against the Herald. The Herald were making money in advertising. We had to make money, but we sort of united and made the city even stronger in lots of ways. And it was just, it was great. You just felt you achieved. And then the Herald would get involved with you. And I'd read bits out in the Herald, and then the lights would flash, all the red lights. Well, you've now done this thing that David Bassett taught me from day one. He said, Ian, you've got to pierce the preoccupied mind. And that basically means, and when he explained it to me, he said, look, what I want you to do, he said, a lot of people on the show you're doing, they'll be getting home at about 6:30, 7:15, going up their drive or parking outside their house. Make them stay in the car. Don't make them switch you off. Make them listen to the end of the song or listen to what you were talking about. And he said, that's how you do it. And that's what we did. We got a reaction, we got a gut feeling from the people in the city.
Because it was so successful, David was able to say to the radio authority, well, there you are. You know, in spite of all your problems, you know, your negativity, we have done it, and look at it now. And I think he didn't let people forget it. I think he rather enjoyed that.
We would have the meetings once a month on a Tuesday, as he came off air, at 12:30, because he would always have his come off air at 12. He'd have his wind down, his Golly cigarette, his French cigarette. Then it was called the huddle. And he said, we've still got to maintain this village radio and loudspeaker mentality. And this is where the Plymouth Village thing came in again. He said, we are the loudspeaker for this city. Good times and bad times. You know, when the dockyard need us, we're there. When it snows, we're there. When our armed forces are away overseas, we've got to, you know, play big there. This is how it works. And throughout all those eras of great soccer teams at Argyll, when we started having good success and things, sadly our forces away in the Falklands, we grew even stronger then. You realize that the people needed you more than you needed them, because they had somebody to listen to. So all the news came from us. We were there, and even the Herald admitted we were just flying out.
It just grew. I think it's as the ratings came in and as we got more callers, more popular, we did more outside broadcasts. And I think I realised the success of the station when the politicians started asking to come on.
We squeezed this in between engagements because we've known you so many years, and you've always been very kind to us, and to me in particular, whenever I've had to come along here, especially in the early days, if you remember, when I think most councillors were a bit nervous about local radio. And,
I think we were as well.
And I've always been thankful that you've always treated us with courtesy and kindness.
We didn't have to ask them. They would very often phone and say, there's a big story coming up and I'm going to be saying this. And it would go first to the newsroom, to Malcolm Carroll, and then it would be passed on to the presenters, and either David or I would take that on, and we would do a phone-in around it. And the politicians became a very important part of my phone-in. David would do it on an ad hoc way. They would come and go on Phone Forum, but they had regular slots on Talk with Louise, and they were always there, not necessarily the same time of the week, but they were always on Talk with Louise throughout the month. We didn't have the tension that seems to have grown up between presenters and politicians these days. It was more, I can't say friendly, but it was more agreeable.
The minute anybody had anything happen to them in their lives, it was like they instantly rang Plymouth Sound. I mean, I used to occasionally cover reception during those days, and the phones would just be non-stop all day long. The minute you switch them on, and caller after caller, and several callers coming in at once, it just never ended. And dedications and messages about lost things, and things would just go straight into the studio and be read without even the presenter looking at them properly. I remember Peter Gregg reading out a car that had been stolen, saying, "Oh, it's a red Fiesta, and the registration number is FR1 DAY. Oh, that's Friday. Oh no, that's the day it was stolen." And but he just would do that on air without even thinking about it, you know.
It wasn't like going to work. I never worked from 1975 until GWR sacked me.
The board decided to accept an offer from GWR Radio to buy us.
It was bottom line up. It was nothing to do with talent. If we could make this pay, do this, do that, it failed.
Our great philosophy to be for the community, with the community and about the community would have stayed. That did not stay with GWR.
It assets stripped, and it brought in trained SEALs who would work cheap work, long shifts.
You would find that people would come in that didn't really have a radio background. They were more of a business background, and they would just see lively personalities around the offices saying, "Oh, they'd be good on the radio."
Talentless, not their fault. They wanted to be in radio.
Just because somebody is a personality in the office, it doesn't mean they're going to be very good on the radio. And because you had presenters that had sort of served their time. They'd done the cover work, they'd done the weekend shows, they'd done overnights. You know, their next step should be getting a daytime show, and the absolute peak of their local radio career should be when they get the breakfast show. So grabbing somebody from an office and sticking them on the breakfast show without any prior presenting experience is not good.
The station became unrecognisable to those of us who'd known it in the early days, yeah. It didn't, well, I don't think it worked. It clearly didn't, because the ratings plummeted.
With the new Plymouth Sound on 97 FM. Choose the style that suits you best.
I think it was the networking of the music from Bristol. Everything was piped down,
During the tenure of doing evenings, we did start with the computer side of things, and it was quite funny because we had playlists, and we were like, what are these things? There's a list of songs. Oh, do I have to play these? And so you would try and stick to your playlists. A lot of the time I didn't, and I didn't really get a lot of feedback about it. But I can remember dear Brian Measures, bless him, who used to play a lot of Richard Clayderman and Klaus Wunderlich and things like that, big band and organ music, suddenly having this playlist. And he was having to stick to it, and it was not music that he really was used to playing. And so I can remember, it might have been Suffragette City. So can you imagine Brian Measures playing Suffragette City, and this huge guitar coming to an end. There was silence, and then in came Brian going, well, that certainly came and went, didn't it? David Bowie and Suffragette City. This is Brian Measures. And it was just not him at all. So he didn't last too long with the playlist. He just went back to playing his dear old Daniel O'Donnell's and what have you.
Brian Measures presents 2 hours of the Plymouth sound of love. Tender mood music, from the dance bands to the Hammond organ. Brian Measures was born in Devonport. His parents are Plymouth-born. His childhood was spent at Dowsland. Brian has now left the uniform side and joined another department of the post office. His hobbies are walking on the moors, gardening, winemaking, and listening to music.
I think it started when the regular presenters went on holiday. We didn't bother with a stand-in presenter necessarily. They would very often pipe the music down. Then I think it was almost imperceptible to begin with, the changes. I was very well aware of it because I knew what was being said. It hadn't been done, but it was being said. And comments like, well, this format's very old-fashioned, made my ears prick up, and I thought this will be the next thing to go. And sure enough, that the format changed.
We are going forward to great things, and I mentioned satellite broadcasting earlier on with Nick Johnson, who's now involved in that, and that's the big thing of the future. And you won't have noticed as you drove up that we have 2 satellite dishes now, and I must tell you, because you'll be interested, we've just got the planning permission. and so we've got one on the ground and one sticking out, and we're going to get a lot more programmes through that service in the future.
I think I'm right in saying that first of all the afternoon phone-in went. I think Phone Forum went on a bit longer.
I was one of the first ones to talk to you, so I got to be one of the last ones.
You are the last, my love.
I am?
Yes.
Sorry that, you're going off, yeah, but I wish you all the best in the world.
Yes.
They cut all that out.
Sadly, people don't even know their next door neighbours' names nowadays. So I don't think it's just a radio problem. I think it's a social problem that we're not connecting, communicating anymore.
Plymouth Sound was just one of the many radio stations who faced a change in direction during their lifetime.
When I first went there, I went to 2CR in Bournemouth in '97 as breakfast presenter, and I went there from Australia. So I was learning about British radio at the time, because I'd only worked in Australian radio at the time.
Graham Mack, former programme controller and breakfast presenter at 2CR in Dorset.
So I'd come from a background of quite heavily formatted radio, where you had to say the station name and positioning statement, first thing you said when you opened the mic, and last thing as well. So I'd had it, and I'd worked a few tricks to get around it. Like, for instance, I don't think you can tell the punchline to a bit and then go, today's best music or whatever it is, because it just sounds silly. So I worked out the process of having a sweeper with a really hard start on it to go into after a punchline. So you still ID'd the station, so you worked your way around that format. In radio, sometimes you work really hard on a piece, and you get just the right sound effects and just the right music, and then you rewrite the tagline again and again and again, and you get it just perfect, and you do it great, and it goes out, and it goes into the perfect song and everything. You turn the mics off, and you talk to the people in the studio and go, we really nailed that, we worked hard on that, that was great. I've yet to have a person at an event pick up on one of those things that all that work's gone into, ever. The thing they go is like, is your cat better because your cat wasn't well the other week? Or has your missus ever forgiven you for that thing you said to her that made her do...
It's all the real life, real bits when you've shared a bit of your life, often not intentionally, sometimes in the setup to get you to somewhere else. You've said it, you say, oh, Julie's not happy with me because of this, and then away you go. That's the stuff that they remember. They're the bits that they pick up on.
You're listening to the Village Loudspeaker, a flavour of how local radio has evolved over the years. This is a companion programme to the television documentary of the same name that's available now on the BBC iPlayer.
BBC Radio Solent.
BBC local radio has also been subjected to many changes over the years. One of the legendary Northern voices who has come and gone from several BBC local radio stations is Martin Kellner. Martin remembers the time he first started at BBC Leeds.
I got to BBC local radio round about the mid-80s. And basically, I got a job at Radio 2 doing a Saturday evening show on Radio 2, and I was doing quite a lot of stand-in on Radio 2. So locally, and I was living in Leeds, so they thought, oh, he's on the Saturday on Radio 2. He may be able to do stuff in Leeds. So I started doing a show on BBC local radio round about 84, 85. I'm not very good on the years. I've lost track a long time ago. We were trying at BBC Radio Leeds in those days to do a local version of the Today Show. And you can imagine with the resources, which obviously were better than they are now, but they still weren't, you're not resourced anywhere near as well as Radio 4. So you would actually have a round table discussion with three, because I was doing the breakfast show was the first thing I did on Radio Leeds, and you would do a round table discussion with 4 councillors talking about, ring roads or whether you were going to have a rapid transit system in Leeds. So it would be like the Today. It was very, very local when I first started that. So it's completely different.
Arguably, Martin's most popular time on BBC local radio was when he hosted The Late Show across many regional stations in the north of England.
It went over sort of 6 at one time it went over about 12 stations because it was the BBC in the north. So we covered everything, Lancashire, Yorkshire, Cumbria and all that. And I thought The Late Show, because that Late Show we introduced loads, because it covers Manchester as well, we introduced loads of people. I had Steve Coogan on there, John Thompson, Caroline Aherne, the late Caroline Aherne, she did Mrs. Merton on my show for years. And I really enjoyed that because it was comedy and it was real fun. Twice a week I think we did it for about, I used to go to Manchester and record that, and she was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. She, as Mrs. Merton, now it might be before your time, but she did this character, Mrs. Merton, later went on to TV and then obviously got the royal family and all that. But the Mrs. Merton character was fantastic. I remember we used to do it as a sort of correspondence thing, as a letter. So she would make up letters that come in, and Mrs. Merton can solve your problems. So Mrs. Merton said, I've got a letter here from one of our younger listeners, and she used to talk very carefully like that. I've got a letter here from one of our younger listeners, and it says, I've become obsessed with Michael Jackson. Now, she says she's so obsessed, she's even gone out, she's called Donna, this girl, she's even gone out and bought Thriller. Now, Donna, you shouldn't be buying these devices, you shouldn't even know what they are. And she'd come up with something brilliant like that every week. She was just fantastic. People thought it was for real. She thought Mrs. Merton was a little old lady who would answer your problems. Anyway, we did that. I can't remember if it was a made-up letter or it was a real letter, but it was somebody who said, I live on a council estate and I'm worried people will think worse of me because I live on a council estate. And she says, now, you mustn't think like that. Just because you're on a council estate, it doesn't mean you're scum. And then I just collapsed. And then I said, no, we're going to have to do that again. And so I've kept this in my bloopers file. But I said, we're going to have to do that again. She says, oh, all right. Now, you must realise, if you live in a council estate, it's not a problem. People who live in council estates shouldn't throw stones. Do you know why? They can't afford them. And she just come up with it. And we had about 7 goes at this and never got it.
Broadcaster Martin Kellner. Today at BBC Radio Leeds, Stephanie Hurst presents Mid-Mornings.
I think the difference is for me coming from commercial radio and then being at the BBC now, at BBC Radio Leeds. The joy of it is that I've got more space, and because I think local radio is becoming a bit of a rarity now. It's even more so important, and it gives local voices a chance to be on the air. We do our New Voices thing where we look for local voices to have a career in radio. There's the new evening shows, which is giving so many different people a chance to be on the radio. I think it can be all sorts to everyone, you know, to inform, educate and entertain. We still do that every single day. I think, you know, to add a sheen to it, I think because these days radio sounds so polished, doesn't it? And I think I enjoy bringing that to my shows because I think I spent all those years in commercial radio. It's ingrained within me to bring this sheen and production and jingles and everything and make it sound glossy. And I kind of like doing that radio, but also like to stop and talk to the listener. And I love that I have the opportunity to do that. I never take any of it for granted. It's a privilege to be able to do that. And I can't thank the bosses that allow us to do that on all 39 of the BBC local radio stations.
BBC Local Radio faces many challenges. At a time when audiences are becoming more promiscuous with their choices and going elsewhere, the audience figures are suffering. So what does the future hold?
The founder of local radio, as you will know, is a chap called Frank Gillard.
I caught up with the head of audio and digital for BBC England, Chris Burns.
Frank Gillard, when he was first thinking of setting up local radio, talked about how he wanted local radio to be our local radio. It's the station that you listen to. It's quite tribal. It should be like your sports club. And I think what we need to do is to do all the things we've talked about in terms of being a companion, being excellent, having that emotional connection with the audience. And probably for younger audiences coming through, it's reinventing what that R might mean. You know, what are going to be the things that I'm going to be interested in? If you look at something like BBC Introducing, you know, BBC Introducing started on local radio, works very cleverly with network radio. That has actually given to a whole generation of new artists. You know, people like George Ezra started at Bristol, they end up on network, and we can be if you like, a talent pipeline for all that stuff. We've now got something called Upload, which is a means by which modern storytellers can get their stories out. So it's looking for ways in which you can engage with people in different ways, whilst at the same time preserving the very best of what you do.
Chris Burns sharing her ideas of the network of 39 BBC local radio stations she's now looking after. With the downsizing of local commercial stations, it's often said if you're trying to get into the industry, it's possibly harder than it's ever been to get through the door. But there is community radio, which has been growing steadily.
This is Voice FM.
I think with community radio, it's very much a different ball game to an ILR station because you're more or less reliant completely on volunteers.
We focus on what's going on around us. We have a lot of guests that are trying to raise awareness for issues around the community, local artists, and I think that makes it very special.
Voice FM is fantastic because you look at the board behind us I'm looking at now, there's just so many varied shows. There's a business show, there's the football show, there's our show, lots of different people coming together, really varied.
As you can probably tell, I have an accent. I'm from Portugal originally. I was really insecure and I said, I'm really self-conscious about my accent. Can I actually speak on air? And the person that was there with me, like, oh, absolutely, that makes you unique, that's incredible. Voice gave me the opportunity to kind of grow and be more confident about myself, which I'm really grateful for.
It's about bringing a community together, bringing the small names and the small voices out. That's what it's about.
If we're really not going to have any local radio other than community radio, we need to be too restrictive.
If we could just go out there and earn our money and compete with the big boys on the same terms, then we would not only give them a run for their money, but we would provide an even bigger and better service for this area.
The laws, the legislation has relaxed a reasonable amount over the last few years or so, where some stations can now, the majority of stations can make money from local advertisers. And again, we're talking usually about local advertisers that would be wasting money if they were advertising on a much larger part of the Heart network. So I see any advertising money that we bring in as hoping to support the local economy. So let me drive as many pairs of eyes, pairs of ears as possible by telling people locally what's happening in this town.
So you run something that's quite fun, but it may seem a little bit more amateur, but very, very local, and I think that is very important. So you are reliant on people, maybe people who want a springboard into a radio career will start on a community station. Obviously, the main focus is trying to be completely local, trying to deliver all the local information to your broadcast area. But it is quite challenging because you're restricted as to how much you can actually bring in revenue-wise, particularly if you've got an ILR that overlaps your broadcast area.
I would say setting up and running Black Cat Radio, which I do with a team of directors, is probably the hardest thing I've ever done, because you're running without finances. I've put my own money in over the years, probably about, to keep this quiet, about £30,000 to get the station up and running, buy the equipment and all the rest of it. Now we're a full-time, 24/7 community station. I wouldn't say the problem, but we run on volunteers entirely, which means that sometimes the volunteers have got other things to do, and sometimes at the last minute they can't do their shows. So you have to have a plan B, and because we're not paying them, we can't insist that they're here, but that is the challenge, to keep the schedule full. Ofcom do allow what's called voice tracking, where a presenter can come in and just record the links between the music and put in the local information, and it would take, say, half an hour to do a 3-hour show. So we can keep a local content going, but that's something we do as an exception rather than a rule. I think community radio is probably going to move into the shoes vacated by commercial radio.
I believe community radio is the new local commercial radio.
The local stations sold out to the big boys. The big boys are in it to make money. We're in it to make programmes, which is exactly where we started off back in the 70s.
Voices from community radio there, including Dave Gould, David Harbour, Tony Gillam, Jake Bulmer, Ray Longdown-Peace and Daniela De Palma. With eclectic schedules and frustrations over how to generate funding, there are echoes of the stories from those who first started commercial radio in the UK nearly 5 decades ago. You've been listening to the Village Loudspeaker, a flavour of how local radio has evolved. You can listen again to this show on BBC Sounds and check out a large selection of archived video clips and extended interviews on the programme page. You can also watch the television documentary version of the Village Loudspeaker on the BBC iPlayer.